Welcome to Advice Without Borders, the show where we transcend boundaries to bring you insights from the world's leading financial experts and global thinkers. I'm your host, Emanuel Balarie. Each episode, we delve into the minds of distinguished guests to explore strategies, trends, and innovations shaping the global economy. Whether you're an investor, a trader, an entrepreneur, or simply curious about the future, join us as we uncover the knowledge you need to navigate and thrive in a rapidly changing world. Jim Rogers is a renowned investor, financial commentator, and author who has left an indelible mark on the world of finance. As a co-founder of the Quantum Fund along George Soros, Jim played a pivotal role in one of the most successful hedge funds in history, achieving returns of just over 4,200% in over a decade. His groundbreaking investment strategies and keen market acumen have made him a celebrated figure in the industry. Featured in Jack Schwager's book Market Wizards, Jim's extraordinary career and investment philosophy have inspired countless of traders and investors worldwide. In this episode, we'll delve into Jim's storied career, discuss his views on the current global economic landscape, and uncover his predictions for the future. So sit back, relax, and join us for an insightful conversation with one of the true titans of finance. This is Advice Without Borders with Emanuel Balarie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this show. And with me is Jim Rogers. Jim, thank you so much for being on this show. And a lot going on in the world geopolitically, globally, and I would love to obviously find out more of your thoughts about that. But I thought I'd get started with just a simple question, which is, how did a boy from Alabama, really get started on this investment journey and now is living in Singapore?
Well, that's an extremely good question, and I'm sure it's all an accident. I grew up in a small town in the backwoods of Alabama. My phone number was 5, and that's not a typo. That was my phone number, 1-5, just a simple 5.
Wow.
But somehow or another, I stumbled onto a summer job on Wall Street after my senior year in college. And I had thought I was going to law school and medical school and business school and everything else. I was a confused university student, like many others. But I had this summer job on Wall Street because I met a guy that I liked and he liked me. I went to Wall Street, and after that one summer, I knew I was not going to business school or medical school or anything, except I was going to Wall Street as soon as I could. And
why was that? Was it because you saw people making money? Was it the action? What was the main sort of catalyst that pulled you in?
Both of those, but what it really was, I realized this was that I had a passion for what was going on in the world. I was always trying to watch and follow and figure out what was happening in the world. And here was a place that would pay me and pay me a lot if I did it and did it right. So, medical school wouldn't have taught me that, or business school, or anything, law school. So here was a place that would pay me to pursue my passions. Wasn't even sure those were my passions until then. But once I figured that out, I went straight to Wall Street as soon as I could.
And your parents, I'm curious, what was their like growing up? I mean, again, from a perspective of even just being curious about the world, or like, what did they do? What were their careers? I mean, did you have other siblings? Like, what was the sort of your upbringing that formed this passion of yours?
Well, I was the oldest of 5 sons in this small town, and who knows how I developed this passion. Most people didn't know too much about the world. They didn't know too much about America in those days. I once was talking to my girlfriend, and I said, gosh, I'm 16 and I've never been anywhere. And she said she was 16 and she'd been a lot of places. She'd been to Montgomery and she'd been to Birmingham and she'd been a lot of places. And I explained to her that's not quite what I had in mind. So anyway, for whatever reason, I knew that there was a big world out there and I wanted to see it. And most of the rest of my life I have spent trying to see the world and stay in touch with the world.
Yeah, that's you had that passion, that excitement. And so post Wall Street, and obviously a big the big Wikipedia that you're famous for is the Quantum Fund. And tell me how that started from a perspective. I know you joined a Wall Street firm, but how did you end up deciding to connect with George Soros and say, we're going to just launch a fund? And it was very early, right? I mean, that was one of the first hedge funds, back in that day that even had that pioneering mindset.
It was one of the first hedge funds. In the early days, all the hedge funds in the world could have met at a coffee shop and had coffee together. He was looking for someone to work with him, and I was looking for a job, and we met each other and hit it off, and off we went.
Yeah, that's good. So after that, one of the things that from a career perspective, you have a lot of hedge fund managers that are still going strong. You have the Izzy Englanders of the world, and for you made a decision to stop and pursue some other passions. Why?
Well, again, I had this passion since I was a kid, it turns out, to see the world, to know the world. And I had actually resigned the year before because I wanted to see the world. My goal was to go around the world, and it was to go around the world on a motorcycle. I know it's, not everybody's passion, but that's what I wanted to do. So it came.
And what year was this again, Jim? What year was
1980 is when I finally did it. I closed up and left and set off to go around the world on my motorcycle. If you can think back to 1980, you will know it was impossible. There was Red China, Soviet Union. I mean, it was pretty strange that some guy wanted to get on a motorcycle and go, American from Wall Street, wanted to get on a motorcycle and go around the world in 1980. The borders were closed, et cetera, et cetera. But I've set out to try to get permission. It took me a while, but I finally got permission and I did it. It was what I wanted to do. I wanted to see the world. And I wanted to see all the world. I wanted to see Red China. I wanted to see the Soviet Union. I wanted to see it all. It was a pretty foolish dream as I look back on it, but somehow or another I did it.
And then you did it again.
Yes.
Right. And that was, by the way, that was the book that really inspired me, Adventure Capitalist. I remember picking it up in the bookstore in Chicago and just reading it and just, being inspired about the marriage of investments, but also adventure and culture and all of that. What made you do it a second time around?
Well, I did it the first time on a motorcycle, which was fabulous. I did it with a girlfriend. She always wanted to go home, so it wasn't her dream. But after I finished, I said, well, now let me do this again when I can take longer and see more, and the turn of the millennium is coming up. And I realized that nobody had been around the world at the turn of the millennium. If they had, they didn't put it on the internet. So I said, okay, what I'll do is I'll somehow figure out a way to go around the world at the turn of the millennium, which nobody's ever done. And I did it. It took a while to get permission and organize everything. But so I set out on January 1st, 1999 to see the world with my then girlfriend. We got married on the trip. She's still my wife. She's the mother of my two children. So we were quite keen. It was a good trip, 3 years on the road.
Wow. Looking back, was there a defining moment of all your travels that almost changed or maybe added or maybe even enhanced or maybe confirmed your investment outlook and perspective of how you see investments in general?
Well, the main thing is a single answer is I could see that the world was changing. I had seen that on the first trip. The Berlin Wall fell down. The world started changing. And so by the second trip, it was really in full swing. And I wanted to see what was happening. And I knew it would lead to good investments. So I wanted to find those investments as well. But I was mainly interested in seeing the world and how it was changing.
Yeah. So you saw that, and so would you say now? Look, well, that's 20 years ago, right? Approximately. What? How long? When was, maybe more.
Well,
I'm not sure.
1999 was
Yeah,
21 years ago, 24, sorry, 24
21
years
years
ago.
ago. So if you would travel the world now, although now you don't need, in the old days, you obviously were in areas where there was no internet, there was not a lot of information, and you had some first hand knowledge. But I'm curious, if you would travel the world again today, what would you say is happening? Is it changing again thematically? Like, what is that forward looking um, sort of summary of how you would see the next 20 years shaping up?
Well, there is no Soviet Union anymore. There is no Red China anymore. Well, I guess there is a Red China still, sort of. No, the world is continuing to change. The internet is here, but not just the internet. Artificial intelligence, everything. You can go online now and do just about anything and find out just about anything, which is exciting. The world has always been changing as far as communications are concerned. Now it's very rapid, very dramatic. So if I win again, and I would like to, when my daughters get older, I would like to see the world again. And if nothing else, just walking down the street, you see things changing. And whether it's in shops or the way people dress or what they do. The world is always changing, especially now. And with communication so fast and so frequent, oh my gosh, things are really changing.
Would you do it the same way in a car or a motorcycle, or would you just do the more flying from region to region? Just curious with your daughters.
Well, you learn much more if you are on the ground. If you see the world close to the ground, you see things much better and faster. It's more immediate. Sure, I could fly, but that's not the same thing. If you're driving around the world and you cross a border, it's a lot different from if you fly from one international airport to another. Crossing a border will teach you a lot.
I bet some good stories there. So, one of the sort of the themes or the ideas behind this show is exactly what you touched upon, and it's this idea of advice without borders. And I don't know if you've ever come across this, but as an American, I would have been surprised that few people travel internationally. That's a generalization by and large, but when you travel across and you see different regions, my question to you is, why is the U.S. or people in the U.S. so much U.S. centric versus a much more global, a broader outlook? What is the reason for that?
Well, that's an extremely good question. I guess part of it is geography because, we have two big oceans on either side of us. It's not as though you can just get on your motorcycle and drive to another country very easily. So that's part of the reason. I'm going to use the word, we're a little bit isolated because of the two oceans. If you was living in Europe, and you look out the window, you're probably going to see another country, wherever you are, because there's so many countries and so many borders. We have not had that advantage or disadvantage in the United States, and that's one of the main reasons. But if you look at the rest of the world, look at Asia, look at Africa, Europe, everywhere, there are many, many countries very close by, and it's easy to see those other countries, and many people do.
So you think it's just the proximity of geography, nothing like, I don't know, I wouldn't call it systemic, but cultural. I remember growing up with my family, we'd be in Yosemite National Park going camping, and you'd have the Germans who traveled, had 3 months off, and you had people from Netherlands. And so I'm curious because I think geography is a point, but I haven't been able to figure it out, right? Like, especially now, you could just get on a plane and go, but even from a mindset perspective, it seems a little bit different than people in Asia or even Europe, for that matter.
Well, it's part of what you just said, yes. And you can't just sort of get on your bike and drive to another country. You can't do it, period. I mean, I guess you could, if you go to Canada or something, or Mexico, it's another country, but it's not like in Europe where there are 20 or 30 countries pretty close by, or Africa, or anywhere else. I mean, we have that physical, geographical separation, which has worked its way through to our mindset. I mean, most of us don't think about, Guatemala very much because we don't know where it is. We can't find it.
Yeah.
We've never been there. But if we lived in Italy, we would probably know something about Austria because it's close by, or Germany or whatever, because all these places are close by. And if we hadn't been there, we know people who have been there. So it's a very different factor just being close to so many places. And in the U.S., we are far away from so many places.
Yeah, I think you're right. The mindset component. And so when you traveled and you went and you eventually just kind of continue on in your story, you decided to move to Singapore. You spotted that very early, as a what a transformation that has happened in Singapore. Obviously, great leadership and in general. How did you and Paige come to that conclusion? Of all places, to relocate and start a family.
Well, for many years, I have been telling people that everybody should teach their children and grandchildren Chinese, because China was going to be a very important country in the 21st century. I mean, everybody, of course, ignored me and said, learn Japanese, Japanese, Japanese. That's what they said in the 80s. We all know how that wound up. But having said that, we started teaching. We had our daughter, 2003, in New York. We got a Chinese-speaking governess, and we're teaching the child Mandarin. And she spoke great Mandarin. But she came home from the park one day when she was 4, crying because she said, everybody laughs at me because I don't speak Spanish. They think it's strange that I speak Chinese, and they laugh at me. So we realized that if we were serious, and we were, we had to move to a city where she had to speak Mandarin. She didn't have any choice. So to make a very long story short, we wound up in Singapore, which is an extremely well-run country, extremely successful country. They do speak Mandarin. They do speak English. And since I don't speak Mandarin, it was useful for me that they spoke English here too. So here we are. It's a very successful country, and we're quite happy here, and our children are quite happy here.
Have you picked up Mandarin at all, or are you just?
I am hopeless. I am tone deaf, and Mandarin is a vocal language,
yeah,
and a tonal language. If you can understand the tones, which I don't, you're probably going to be good at it. But no, I am useless.
Okay. So last question on the personal, then I'll move in, although there might pop up some additional ones. But I know that your daughter was just, ended up moving back to New York, or at least to experience, the cultural and or just she went to Columbia, I believe, right? So from a perspective of not West going East, but East going West, was there any key insights that she brought in that she was surprised about, or even from seeing it from a fresh perspective about the U.S. That surprised her?
Well, since she was a young girl, she told us she was going to go to Columbia, and I, of course, ignored it. I said, "What are you talking about? You're 5 years old. You're 9 years old. You're 12 years old. What are you talking about?" I figured it would change someday. Lo and behold, she did it. She pulled it off. She got in, which was impossible to do, but she got in, and she's very happy there. And she's going into her senior year this fall, and we will see. Who knows what she does after Columbia? I don't know yet. She doesn't know, I'm sure. When I was a senior in college, everything I thought was wrong. Everything I thought about me, everything I thought about the world, I had no clue. So I know she's only a young girl right now, and I presume new things will enter her brain and her experience, and we'll see. And it's been 3 or 4 years. As I said,
Yeah.
everything you asked me when I was 20 was wrong. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
That's it. I have a 13-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, and sometimes the conversations are interesting from a perspective of, I think to myself, I think I had the same conversation with my dad when I was your age, and I thought I knew everything about the world, but experience is the only way that you learn, and from that perspective. Um, in terms of the world now and what's happening geopolitically, in the U.S., obviously everywhere in Europe. I remember you had this comment that you've mentioned many times where, one of the best places to invest is somewhere after a civil war, and why? Like, why do you say that, first of all? I mean, I know from a contrarian perspective, but give us a little bit of insights, and where have you seen that personally been successful for you?
Well, not just civil war, any war. I'm very strongly
That's right.
anti-war, but we still have wars. We always have, and we always will. But wars are very destructive. They destroy humans. They destroy capital. They destroy everything. And so after a war, there has to be a lot of new initiatives, new investment, if you will, and everything is very cheap. I mean, prices don't go up during war for the most part. Things go down and things get very, very cheap. I mean, if you'd invested in Japan in 1945, you would be rich now. But that's true of just about any war in history. They're so destructive that it leads to many opportunities. I mean, it's a bad way to find opportunities, but unfortunately, history is pretty clear that if you invest in a country at the end of a war, or even, it doesn't matter if they win or lose a war, it's probably a good opportunity.
More first world countries. I mean, is this also true for, probably not as much for countries that are, not as developed. Thinking maybe places in Africa or different regions. Is this more like in areas where they have a stable economy, generally have had a stable rule of law, and they have to rebuild back up? Or can you be more speculative in areas that, I don't know,
It's true everywhere. The most developed country, I mean, look at Germany in 1945. Germany was an unbelievably developed country in Europe, probably the most prosperous in Europe at one time. But it was destroyed, and that led to great opportunities for anybody who was alert. Japan, I mean, even England, it was a great opportunity to invest in England, and England won that war, or they thought they won that war. So it was a great opportunity to invest in both the winners and the losers because prices went down so much. War is not good for most prices.
Yeah. So where do you see some countries, the next several years? I mean, not moving off the war topic, but just in general, where you see, some bullish opportunities to invest from a country or regional perspective?
Well, if you look around the world, what's happened recently, China got hurt badly by a real estate bubble, which popped, and the virus. China got hit with two major factors. The markets are down. It may be good investments and a good time to invest in China. I am certainly looking for more investments in China. But there are not many countries because for the most part, it's in the last 5, 10, 15 years, most markets have gone up a lot. America, Japan, just about everything is at or near an all-time high. So it's unique in world history where everything is making new highs. I mean, China's not. China's about the only thing. Uzbekistan is down, but Uzbekistan is not the kind of market I'm talking about where everything is down because of a war or something. But China is about the only country right now that is still depressed because everything, I mean, even Japan, which has been down for 35 years, that's not a typo, 35 years, is now making new all-time highs. So it's getting harder and harder to find cheap assets, cheap investments.
And if you would invest in China, are there specific sectors that you would be looking at, or is it
Well, just about everything is down because they had this gigantic real estate bubble, one of the biggest in world history, that finally popped. So that has nearly affected nearly everything, but they also got hit by the virus. So you put together a nationwide virus and a nationwide real estate bubble popping. Just about everything is cheap in China.
Okay. Okay. What do you think about Argentina? I think I mentioned you briefly before, and Javier Milei. I mean, he's obviously had a lot of news fanfare. He's made some bold moves. A libertarian. How would you grade his first, if several months in off 6 months in office? Do you think there's hope in Argentina? And just what are your just general thoughts? I mean, a country that, of course, is super rich in commodities and resources.
Well, nearly everything he said has been positive, at least as far as I'm concerned, as far as investors are concerned. And Argentina has been a great country for possibilities for over 100 years. At the turn of the going into the 20th century, it was most people had to decide between Argentina and the United States if they were going to move to the Western Hemisphere. There was a saying in Europe, if some really rich guy walked in, people would say, look at that guy. He's a rich Argentine, because they were so rich for many reasons. They bungled it, of course, several times in the last 150 years or so, but it still has great possibilities. And if he continues to do what he says he's going to do, sure, it's got natural resources, huge natural resources. South America has a lot of people, so it has markets nearby that could be very successful. No, if you can find good investments in Argentina, I urge you to pursue it.
So it's because I've looked obviously at the country but what would be for you as an investor that would signal some type of a positive move, right? Because again, there's been many different times the political regime has shifted in Argentina, making promises and it hasn't worked out, right?
Well, you're exactly right and very perceptive, because that's the potential main problem with Argentina. They've seen all this before. Even I've seen all this before, and I'm not 150 years old. No, frequently, Argentina has burst onto the world stage and with great changes, great new ideas. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, nearly every time in the past 100 or 150 years, it has not worked. They've gone deep into debt. They spent too much money. They wasted money, whatever. I mean, just because you have great potential doesn't mean you're going to realize the potential. You have to have somebody that's going to make it work, such as the U.S. We made it work. As I said before, it used to be that everybody had to decide between Argentina and the U.S. Those who decided on the U.S. got it right. I don't know if Argentina is going to get it right this time. I know he says and is trying to do the right things, but I don't know whether it's going to work. Not yet.
Yeah. And, as you're talking, Jim, I'm thinking about earlier in our conversation about the borders and mindset and perhaps it's a mindset of even just the people, where unless you have, I mean, the two countries, I don't know that like Singapore, right? They had a very competent and charismatic leader that came in and, a country was able to transform, or Rwanda that has transformed themselves dramatically. But in Argentina, are the people going to be able to be like come alongside sort of the hard measures that are needed for the economy to transport? That's the question.
If you have the answer, you're going to be rich.
And I don't.
Therein lies the problem when you're talking about Argentina. I mean, even Singapore. Who knew, 50 or 60 years ago, this was a swamp with 500,000 people. It has since been one of the most successful countries in the world. But many, I can remember, I read about, I should say, when the British Navy left here in the late 1960s, one of the admirals was overheard at a party, saying, well, this is the end of Singapore. Now the British are leaving and the British Navy is leaving. That place is going to collapse. Well, you know the rest of the story. A few years later, Britain went bankrupt and Singapore became extremely successful.
Yeah, that's right. You just don't know. What are your thoughts? Just having a little bit of insight on Rwanda. Were you ever able to travel to Rwanda, just as a country that, I think the last time I looked, one of the fastest growing GDP in Africa, obviously coming off and they've transformed themselves tremendously. I'm curious. Do you have a thought on the country and how that's transformed over the years?
Well, I have visited in recent months Rwanda, and it is a very dramatic transformation. The question I have, or had, and still have, is, everybody felt sorry for Rwanda because of the gigantic disaster in the early 90s. And so nearly everybody made contributions and donations to Rwanda to make up for the nightmare of the early 90s. So I don't know if the change is real or just the fact that suddenly they got gigantic amounts of money, or if it's going to continue. I don't know. I could certainly see what had happened and what is happening, but I don't know enough to know if it's going to be like Singapore or like Japan or many other countries that have turned around.
I've thought the same thing, but to a certain level, it's been stewarded somewhat well. I mean, you're right. I mean, it could have just evaporated in terms of donations, and so from what I've seen, it's but yeah. So Jim, on one of the things that I know you've also been famous for is the commodities, and your book in the Rogers Commodity Index, Raw Materials Index. Are you surprised looking back? I mean, just on the index as a whole, that maybe it has not performed as it should in terms of the commodity markets in general? And what's the reason for that? Not the index, but just the thematic move on some of these commodities over the years.
Well, if you look at many more, we'll use commodities. Most markets have had big cycles throughout history. The American stock market hasn't gone up every day or every month throughout history. There have been long periods when the American stock market or the Japanese stock market has had long periods when nothing happened. So this is the way markets work, have always worked. So you say that there have been a bad stretch for commodities. Go back for the past 100 years, 200 years, whatever you want. There have always been bad stretches for any kind of market. So I don't find that unusual.
Okay. So from a perspective of when you started trading and getting in the investment market, the world now is a lot different. You have cryptocurrencies on the scene. You have meme stocks. You have just a change that has shifted how investors are investing in the markets. You think it's a fad, like from a perspective of, and eventually people are going to get burned? What's your opinion? I mean, I know there's a lot of different questions. Let me start. What's your opinion, first of all, of crypto and cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and what's transpired over the last several years?
Well, first of all, let's go back throughout history, and there have been long periods when investment markets have done well. Once upon a time, if you were in electricity, oh my gosh, your stock went through the roof. At one time, there was a gigantic mania in railroad stocks. You could not believe how high railroad stocks went once upon a time. Radio. Once upon a time, Radio Corporation of America was one of the hottest stocks in the world. So this is not the first time that a new industry or a new company or something has come along and has captured people's imagination. It's going to happen the rest of our lives and our children's lives as well. So yes, it is happening now. Crypto is very hot for many people. I don't have investments, either long or short, in crypto, but many people do. Now, many crypto.
Why? Sorry to interrupt you, but why not? Like if you're looking at it as something of a trend, or there's momentum going in that direction, why would you not invest yourself personally?
Well, I don't see any dramatic long-term use of crypto. They're great trading vehicles. Many cryptos have already gone bankrupt and disappeared, as you may know. If you don't know, please do your homework, because many of them have already disappeared and gone to zero. There have been great trading vehicles, and maybe there's some kind of long-term use, which I don't see yet. If so, I'm sure whichever ones you buy, if you buy the right ones, are going to make you unbelievably rich. But I have not bought any because I don't see them as anything other than a trading vehicle, and I'm not much of a trader.
Yeah, you and me both on that one. And maybe that's the philosophy of, obviously you were featured in I think the last time we met together was with Jack Schwager in, I believe it was Shanghai, and you were featured in his Market Wizards book. And one of the things that Jack very well talks about is you have to find out your type of investment profile or philosophy of what works best for you. And so you have the different traders, and would I be accurate to say yours has always been more fundamentally grounded, thematic, where's the world heading themes, and then finding those best opportunities? Is that your philosophy of investing, generally speaking?
Well, that's more or less the way I do it. I try to find something that's cheap where there's a big change taking place. But I hope to find a change that's going to go on for a long time, because I'm lazy. And, if I can find something I can buy and own for years, I'm quite happy. And that essentially is my ideal. Now, there are people who are great short-term traders. I've known some astonishing short-term traders in my life, but I'm not one of them. Either I'm not any good at it, or I'm too lazy, or too dumb, whatever. I prefer to find something with a dramatic long-term change taking place where I can invest because it's cheap and I own it for a long time.
It's not India, or is it?
Well, it might be India.
I make that comment because I know you mentioned previously that there's so many different. India is a hard investment to make, right? You mentioned that over the years, and I'm curious to know a little bit why.
Well, I have invested in India at times in my life, but I have not seen that India has made the dramatic change that, say, Japan did 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Now, Mr. Modi, the current prime minister, he was just reelected, we think, this week. He has been saying, for the first time in my life, Indian politicians are saying the right things and perhaps doing the right things. I've heard them talk a lot in the last 30, 40, 50 years, but this man seems to be serious and seems to understand. Now, the election was very close and he just barely squeaked by, so I don't know if it's going to work. But if Mr. Modi does continue and does what he says, India might now be one of those kind of markets where you should close your eyes and buy everything you can, because it's going to make you rich. It seems that it seems that he understands what needs to be done. Now let's see if he can do it.
Okay. Wow. That's a great insight. Any other places where you mentioned long term and you invest into it, say 20 years from now, or what would you tell your daughters, or would you tell my son who's 13, like this, and it could be like a language, or it could be a region, it could be like, where would be the one place that you would say, listen, if you have the gumption or the ability to get up and move, or focus on something, learn a language, where would that be?
Well, I have taught my children Mandarin, Chinese, because in my view, China in their lifetime is going to be the most important, or one of the most important countries in the world. So my answer to you is China. Now, if
Still
Mr.
China.
Modi really does, is going to change India the way he says, you might think about learning Hindi as well. But my goodness, there are a lot of Indians, and many of them speak Hindi. It's not quite like Mandarin Chinese, but still, they have what it takes if the government, if Delhi puts its mind to it, then maybe India. Uzbekistan is another country, but most people are not going to bother with Uzbekistan. All of it is a fantastic country to visit. And if you do visit, you might make investments as well.
Yeah, that's the second time you mentioned Uzbekistan, so I don't know much about it. I mean, what is fast? What can you tell us just like a brief, like summation of why you find it interesting as an investment opportunity?
Well, Uzbekistan at times in history has been a gigantic success story. You may have heard of Tamerlane. If not, Tamerlane at one time controlled most of the world. I mean, he was a great conqueror and he was a great administrator. Uzbekistan was a center of the world once upon a time. Now, the communists came along, the Soviets ruined it. It became one of the Soviet stands, unfortunately for them. But now they seem to be changing again. They have vast natural resources. They have lots of smart capitalists living there and working there. And the government says that they understand and they're going to support and encourage capitalism and development in Uzbekistan. They've got gigantic neighbors. They have lots of natural resources. If they're pulling it off, it's going to be a great success again.
Okay. Thank you for that. So just a few more minutes, and just wanted to get your thoughts more on a little bit personal macro. Have you read, which are the books that you have read that have inspired you the most, or have had an impact in terms of how you live your life, or the ideas, or have helped in terms of transformation? I'm just curious if there's one or two books that you would say, these two books, Emanuel, I would highly recommend.
Well, when I was young in the business, there was a guy named Adam Smith. That was his pen name. His real name was Jerry Goodman. He wrote a book called The Money Game, and it was quite a popular book in the U.S. in the 60s. And I read it, and it certainly made a huge impression on me because he talked a lot about the investment world and how it works. There was another one called Intelligent Investor by Ben Graham, which was much more of a fundamentalist kind of book. These were a couple of books that I read early in my career that made big impressions.
Okay. And aside from finance, do you read anything else, or you're, like any other books, or has it been just?
I am constantly on the internet, constantly reading, whether it's newspapers or news events. I am constantly reading about the world. Yes. My passion, as I said to you before, when I went to university, my passion was the world. I realized, found out, and it still is.
Do you have any ideas of what's going to happen in the U.S. with the election? I mean, seems extremely polarized.
Well, I hope
as a country.
I certainly hope we have an election. If we don't have an election, we have serious problems. I'm not suggesting we won't. Certainly, I'm sure we're going to have an election in 2024. I don't know who's going to win. I know that usually whoever is in the lead at this point usually does not lead, at least historically. So I don't know who is going to win. I will tell you, I will not vote for either of the two guys in the lead. So I rarely vote for the people who win American elections because they're usually not very smart people and they usually have bad ideas. That's why I usually don't vote for the winner.
Yeah, because you vote for people who you believe in and you agree with, and I would imagine a little bit maybe libertarian leaning if I would take a gamble.
Well, if you look back over the last 50, 60, 70 years, we have not selected really smart people to be president of the United States, unfortunately, and I'm sure that's going to continue.
Yeah. Ray Dalio talks about, looking at the historical trends and and the lead up of potential, civil war. I mean, however that looks like, because when you have, the polarization and the wealth gap disparity that he talks about, I mean, you think that's a likely scenario? I mean, again, from a trend perspective, do you see any catalyst or any hope where there's unification in the U.S.?
Did you say unification?
Unification, like from a perspective of not as, polarized.
Well, I doubt seriously, because it's a huge country with over 300 million people and vast geography. So it is, if you ask me, normal for a country with those characteristics to have big splits. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a disaster. America has had one major civil war in our history. We don't have to have more, so we might, but I don't see civil war in our near-term future. Now, of course, it can happen. People in Washington have strange ideas, strange people, not very smart people. That's why they go to Washington. They want a government job because they're not very smart. So, yes, of course it can happen in the U.S. I don't think it's going to happen in this time around. Maybe later, but not this time around.
Yeah. All right. So, my last question for you, Jim, and I really appreciate your time. This was enjoyable. If you would go back and you learned something during your journeys that you wish you would have learned earlier, it was a costly, I don't know, or advice that you can give that you wish someone would have told you before you started your investment journey, what would that be?
Well, if somebody had told me back then, I wish somebody had made me learn Chinese. When I started in the investment world, Mao Zedong was still alive, but he died in 1976. And I wish somebody had yanked me by the scruff of my neck and said, okay, boy, go learn Chinese. If I had learned Chinese when Mao Zedong died in 1976, oh my gosh, I would be rich now.
Why? What would have been? What would you have done? So let's play it out. I'm curious. So if you would have learned Chinese at that point, would you have just gone straight to China? Like, what would have happened?
Well, I presume I would have had enough. I mean, I actually went to China in the 80s more than once, and I could see what was happening. I mean, I went back to New York and had a fabulous life. Don't get me wrong. Don't have regrets. I'm just saying that an alternative could have been at that time for me to stay in China, learn Chinese, and participate in the dramatic change that took place in China after Mao Zedong died. Just saying that is something that would have been a dramatic, positive change that I could have done. I don't have regrets. I don't have regrets.
Well, you did it for your next generation, for your daughters. So you at least were able to do that.
I don't have regrets about my life. Well, I mean, I make mistakes like everybody, but no, if I had stayed in China in the 80s, who knows? Who knows? I hope I would be very rich, but I'm quite satisfied and content with the life I've led.
Yeah. Jim, thank you so much for taking time and for sharing your insights and transparency and really appreciate you coming on the show and good to see you again.
As you well know, it's always fun. Thank you very much, and I hope we can do it again someday.
Okay. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Bye-bye.